Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into the Sound Bites podcast. The latest numbers from the CDC suggest that nearly 1 in 3 adults have either prediabetes or diabetes. These are alarming numbers, and finding out that you are the 1 out of 3 can be even more alarming. Shock, denial, and confusion are not uncommon reactions. But there is a flip side to learning you have prediabetes. It can be scary, but it's also an opportunity to reset, to improve your health, and to get yourself in better shape than ever. On today's episode, I'm talking with my good friend and fellow certified diabetes educator, Jill Weisenberger. We're talking about all things prediabetes. She has a new book out called Prediabetes, A Complete Guide. In this episode, you're going to learn all about the risks for developing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and a lot about behavior change and what I really think about the term reversing diabetes and what Jill thinks too. We talk, like I said, a lot about behavior change, how to set personalized and meaningful behavioral goals, and how to build on your motivation for this lifestyle reset. We talk about changing eating habits for weight loss and greater insulin sensitivity. The book gets into how you can tweak your favorite recipes and reduce emotional eating, and also organize and track your progress with the tools included in the book. I'm also posting on the show notes some pretty cool pictures from some of the travels that Jill and I have been on together. Please stay tuned after the episode for some important announcements from my partner, the American Association of Diabetes Educators. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome back to the Sound Bites podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Joy Dobbins, a registered dietitian nutritionist. And on the show, we delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition. And today's episode is all about prediabetes. And my guest today is my very dear friend and fellow registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator, Jill Weisenberger. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
I am so looking forward to diving into prediabetes and your new book, which is one of 4. But I'll do a brief intro for you. You have a lot of alphabet soup after your name, but you are an internationally recognized nutrition and diabetes expert. You're the author of 4 books, including the best-selling Diabetes Weight Loss Week by Week and the new Prediabetes, A Complete Guide. And you're also a panelist for the U.S. News and World Report Best Diet Rankings. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So every year, U.S. News and World Report puts out their rankings of best diets based on safety, nutrition, ease of following it, best for diabetes, best for weight loss, various things like that. And they ask a number of us who have some expertise in nutrition and health to review the diets and rank them. So it's not like we all sit in a room or anything like that. We're all doing it on our own. We have the information that U.S. News and World Report gives us and any information that we want to use in addition to that. And we just answer some questions and make some comments. And then the folks at U.S. News and World Report put all that together. They tally up the results and make some comments, and that is how they come up with their rankings. And I am so honored to be on that panel because it's something that gets a lot of press. It gets a lot of publicity. So I am very happy that I can share my expertise in a way that reaches a lot of people.
Yes, and having that wonderful expert perspective on what makes the best diets. Can't think of a better person than you.
Oh, thank you.
You and I go way back, not that far, I guess. It just seems like a long time, but we met at an AADE meeting, American Association of Diabetes Educators meeting back in 2012. And I interviewed you for my blog back then, and that was way before I was podcasting. And ironically, in hindsight, I think those blog interviews with different dietitian experts kind of was the precursor to this podcast. And you have been on the podcast before too.
Yes.
Would you believe I had to look back and see what episode it was? Now, the show has recently celebrated its 4-year birthday, and we are well over 100 episodes, but you were on podcast episode number 11.
Ha!
Isn't that funny? Way back. And we talked about one of your books, The Overworked Person's Guide to Better Nutrition. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was back in June of 2015. So it's taken a long time to get you back on the show, but I'm so excited that you're here.
Thank you. Me too.
Now, you and I also have been to some pretty cool places in the world together, and the show is not about that, but I couldn't help but mention that you and I have been to Machu Picchu together. We've been to Portugal, and we've been to Norway. So I love traveling with you and seeing the world and learning all about nutrition and food across the continents.
Yeah, it's a great thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, prediabetes. Now, I've been a certified diabetes educator for 20 years, and you've been a certified diabetes educator for how long?
Probably pretty close to that, maybe 17 or 18 years.
Right. And you kind of have a special mix of hats that you wear. You not only are a prolific writer with your books, but also your blog, and you also write for a lot of news outlets, and you interview for them as well.
Yeah.
But you also see patients and dabble in research.
I do.
So can you tell us a little bit about the work you do now and maybe a little bit of your background? People can always go back and read the old blog and listen to podcast episode number 11. But for those who maybe aren't familiar with you, I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey.
Sure. I call myself an accidental dietitian because I didn't start off being a dietitian. That was not part of my plan. I actually have a degree from the University of Florida in the communications school, but specifically in advertising, and I worked in marketing, and I just was not happy in marketing. So one day I was still living near the University of Florida, and I was walking on the campus looking for a new job. But I had a marketing background, so I was really looking for marketing jobs. And I don't really know what hit me, but I just walked across the street right over to the registration, and I applied to graduate school without having any background in science. I didn't even have pre-calculus yet, but I applied for a master's degree in nutrition.
And you have no idea why?
Well, it's something I had been interested in, but I wasn't really thinking about doing it at the time. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about finding a job, and I just didn't like what I was doing. And just walking around the campus, and it's like, I don't want to work in marketing on this campus. I want to study something exciting. And then I was married 6 weeks, and I came home and told my husband what I had done. Fortunately, he was on board.
Yes, thank goodness.
And I got my master's. It took me 4.5 years because I had to take pre-calc and Chem 1 and 2 and 3 and biochem and food chem and all those other classes before I could even get into nutrition. So I feel like it was an accident, but it was such a fabulous accident. Mm-hmm. And I have never looked back, and I've had a very interesting, exciting career. I've just done a lot of different things. And you mentioned research, which I'm not doing now, but I did spend more than a decade, maybe even close to 15 years or so, working as a research dietitian associated with drug studies. So whenever drugs are put on the market, they have to undergo quite a lot of research and investigation. So one of the things that they do when it's a diabetes drug or a weight loss drug, sometimes cholesterol and blood pressure, so forth, is they give people, whether they're on the drug or on a placebo, they give them the same treatment otherwise. So it was a diet treatment. So I was the nutrition diet educator involved in the drug studies. And it was a wonderful, wonderful type of work because I got to see people a lot, because sometimes the studies would last 2 years and would start off maybe every other week and then would go to every month. Sometimes the studies were a year or various lengths, but I got to see people a lot. and really get to know them that way and help them create their own best path. And that's really where I am today. I'm very much into helping everybody find their own best path. And so I have a private practice. It's in Newport News, Virginia. It's very small. I typically work in diabetes, prediabetes, anything cardiometabolic, fatty liver, cholesterol, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I always love talking with you about, your real patient experiences and insights, and of course the research aspect as well. Whenever we're traveling together and there's some study out, I'm always like, Jill, explain this to me. What does this mean? So we always have some fun conversations there. Now, your new book, which I have my beautifully signed copy in front of me here, is Prediabetes, A Complete Guide, Your Lifestyle Reset to Stop Prediabetes and Other Chronic Illnesses. Now, what prompted you to write this book, and why prediabetes?
Prediabetes is huge. So that's one of the main things that prompted me to do it, is that it's just so incredibly common. I usually say to people, if you can just go into a crowded supermarket or a sporting event and count out 9 people or 10 people, chances are 3 of them at least have prediabetes. And the real problem is maybe one of them knows that they have it, because most people who have it have not been diagnosed. But the reason to write the book is that it is so common. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's at a very early stage in the continuum of type 2 diabetes. And it's a stage that we can do a lot with. So the longer we have the problems that lead to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, the harder it is to turn things around. But when you have prediabetes, yes, it's still a problem. I like to say it's not pre-problem, but you are at that perfect stage to stop what's going on, and you do not have to get type 2 diabetes. At least most people will not have to get type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, prediabetes is somewhat of a recent term. It wasn't around when I started my clinical and counseling jobs. Tell us a little bit about why this term and diagnosis came about, and maybe a little bit about the actual diagnosis versus type 2 diabetes.
Okay, so to get the diagnosis of prediabetes, it is strictly blood sugar driven. So if your blood sugar is elevated and it's not to the level of diabetes, then you have prediabetes. I can give you a couple of thoughts about why it became important to make that term prediabetes. And that's because people were being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and they already had some complications right at diagnosis. They might have some nerve disease, which was pretty common, and they frequently had some heart disease as well. And the idea being that if we can get them earlier and set them down a more healthful path, then we can avoid that. So part of it was to identify at-risk people earlier. And the other aspect of that is that prediabetes is a sign that there's something metabolically awry. And it's not just blood sugar. We define diabetes and prediabetes by blood sugar, but they're more than blood sugar problems. We have problems that are associated with insulin resistance, like fatty liver, high triglycerides, low HDL levels, high blood pressure typically. So there's a number of things that are associated with prediabetes that are not just blood sugar.
And, you mentioned a couple of terms like insulin resistance, which I want to get into because I don't think a lot of people really understand what that means. But I'm also wondering too, when prediabetes, the term and the diagnosis came about, I was relieved as an educator because I thought, okay, maybe now we'll stop using this term borderline. And to your point, all of a sudden, people were just all of a sudden diagnosed, but they'd already had diabetes for some time and clearly prediabetes, even though we didn't have a word for it. And a lot of times they were either told or they self-diagnosed that, they were borderline. And, we used to say, well, you're pregnant or you're not. You have diabetes or you don't.
Right.
So do you think that helped us? Because I don't hear the term borderline as much anymore. Do you think the prediabetes concept and diagnosis has helped that conversation?
I think perhaps it has. I think you make a good point with that. People are more apt to take notice when there's a real term associated with the condition.
Some clarity instead of, you're kind of in the gray area, right? And so, reiterating what you said, with prediabetes, your blood sugars are higher than quote unquote normal, but not yet high enough to be diagnosed as diabetes. So explain what insulin resistance is and how that plays in.
Sure. Insulin resistance is a hallmark of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's like a continuum. So very, very early on in the condition of insulin resistance, nobody has any idea what's going on. There are no signs and blood sugar is normal. So what's happening is the body or certain cells of the body are becoming resistant to the hormone insulin. So instead of insulin just doing its jobs normally, and one of those jobs is to usher sugar out of the blood and into the cells. So instead of doing that, it's a little bit stubborn, we say. And so the pancreas just shoots out extra insulin to make up for it. So it's kind of like if you knock real quietly and nobody comes to the door, you start knocking louder and louder and louder. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's happening. The insulin level is normal, but it's not working. So we get higher insulin levels. And what it does is it keeps blood sugar initially at the normal level. So we have insulin resistance, but we have normal blood sugars. Nobody would ever know what's going on. But then we get to the prediabetes stage. And what happens is insulin levels might still be high, but they're not high enough. And that's because the pancreas just cannot keep up with the demand. So blood sugars rise a little bit, and we have prediabetes. And over time, the pancreas gets even more worn out and more tired, can not keep up with the previous level of insulin. So it might still be high, but it's not high enough. And we get blood sugar levels up to the level of diabetes. And as time goes on, the pancreas, over 20 or so years perhaps or more, the pancreas is going to get even more exhausted and not be able to put out enough insulin at all. And then somebody with type 2 diabetes might need insulin injections or a pump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we should clarify, prediabetes is pre-type 2 diabetes.
Correct.
It's not associated with type 1 diabetes at all, and we're talking about pre and type 2 diabetes today.
Correct.
So with the insulin resistance, can you explain how that affects more than just blood sugar levels?
Sure. I think insulin is best known for its role in ushering sugar out of the blood and into the cells. But it has other jobs. It affects the kidneys. And because of that, insulin resistance can lead to high blood pressure. It also affects lipid metabolism. So that would be cholesterol and triglyceride metabolism. And because of that, we frequently see abnormal levels of triglycerides and abnormal levels of HDL cholesterol. And also, insulin resistance, the way it manifests in the liver is by fatty liver.
And then there's a term, metabolic syndrome. Is that part and parcel with insulin resistance? Can you explain metabolic syndrome?
Sure. It is similar, but they are not the same. Metabolic syndrome is a constellation of several things, and one of those might be high blood sugar. Another one might be high triglycerides, low HDL, also elevated waistline. So often people with prediabetes have metabolic syndrome and vice versa. And it does get confusing, I think, when people are reading about it because they're not sure which ones we're talking about and does it really affect them. But the bottom line is they're intricately connected.
I mean, somebody could have metabolic syndrome and have all kinds of symptoms and outcomes, but may never have diabetes.
That is true.
So who is this book for? And we're going to kind of talk about what people can find in the book. I loved it. It's very well written. There's a lot of behavior change stuff in here, and we're going to talk about that. But before we move forward with that, who is this book for?
Well, it is written with the person with prediabetes in mind, or the person who is trying to prevent type 2 diabetes. But quite honestly, since it really is a lifestyle reset, it is perfectly suited for many, many people, including people with any type of cardiometabolic disorder, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, high cholesterol, heart disease, stroke risk, because all of those things really are related. And the emphasis is, like you said, it's on behavior change.
Excellent. So there's one more term that I wanted to discuss with you. And we see this a lot in the media about reversing diabetes. There are books with that word in the title. I've never been a fan of that phrase because I feel that I want people to understand that continuum that you spoke of, and that I want them to be empowered and motivated to make some changes to slow or halt the process, but I don't want them to feel misled or misunderstand that, they can just do all of these things and the diabetes just goes away. But I think you might have a little bit more to fill us in on that. So how do you feel about the term reversing diabetes?
Actually, I like it. And what I don't like is when people use reverse diabetes to mean cure diabetes. But we can reverse a lot of things. We're reversing course. When we lose weight, we're reversing our overweight or our obesity. When we improve our blood pressure, we are reversing course there. And we can reverse course with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes very often. That is not 100% of the time, but it really is very often. So to me, reversing is having a long-lasting, not necessarily permanent, but long-lasting improvement without the use of additional medication. So I think it's a reversal when somebody is able to get off of one of their diabetes medications for years or be able to lower the dose. I think that's a reversal. So I actually like the term because I think that it is empowering. It tells people we can do something. But when people confuse reverse with cure, it's a red flag for me. And that's very, very disturbing because, as you said, we might have it managed with diet and exercise, but we still have it. It's not a cure.
No, well, thank you for clarifying that because I agree the way you explain it. It really conveys the concept of you're not just stopping everything in its tracks and staying where you're at. You are actually improving some of these processes and outcomes. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're always enlightening me and educating me. Let's talk about what's in the book. And like I said, there's a lot of behavior modification stuff that we're going to talk about. What would they opened up to the table of contents and browsed through there, what can they find in this book?
Whatever it is that you're looking for to change your behavior, there's probably something in there about that. So we cover diet and exercise with weight loss. We cover diet without weight loss, exercise without weight loss. Keep in mind, not 100% of people with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes actually need to lose weight. There's quite a number of people who don't. But even without weight loss, diet and exercise can help. We talk about limiting sedentary behavior, getting enough sleep, how to tweak your recipes so they're more health boosting, more nutrient dense, how to get your head in the game, which is a huge, huge problem for people. There's so much negative self-talk, like, I ate that candy bar, I'm a pig, I'll never lose weight, I'm doomed to get diabetes. These things are just not facts. And so much negative self-talk. So those are some of the main things. And like you said, lots of ways to change behavior and some worksheets to help you along the way.
Yeah, I love the worksheets. And you mentioned the term nutrient dense, and you recently had a TV segment and you were talking about lunchtime and how we're multitasking at lunchtime and, we're eating at our desk and we're just grabbing whatever, but you showed a meal that you could really pack with a lot of nutrient dense foods, that those foods are multitasking for you.
That's
and
right.
I'm always tend to use the term nutrient rich. But I really liked that angle and that word that
multitasking.
Yeah, the foods have a variety of nutrients in them, so they're multitasking for you. And that was salmon and walnuts and avocado, which, who doesn't love all those things?
That's right.
I love the way you kind of communicate that, and you do things like that throughout the book as well. So in the book, you talk about, and even as the subtitle is the lifestyle reset, and also a wellness vision. So maybe that's a good place for us to kind of talk about what that looks like.
Sure. Okay. So the lifestyle reset, that is like the framework of the whole book. It's how we can change our habits and change our lifestyle, change the habits that are our thoughts, the habits that are our eating behaviors, the habits that are exercise or sitting behaviors, all of that. So it's a lifestyle reset in that respect. And a wellness vision comes from my coach training. And I found it to be a real game changer for a lot of the people I work with in my private practice. So after we get to know each other just a little bit in my private practice, I ask them to paint me a picture of themselves at their best, happiest, healthiest, most fit self. And so I want to know, like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you eating? What are you wearing? What are your habits like? And when they get that, they realize, first of all, it takes some time. They don't just come up with it out of their head. It's hard work. But once they get it, they think, oh, that's what I'm working toward. I'm not working toward getting into a size 8 dress. I am working into this feeling of fitness and happiness. One of my patients said many things, but one sentence in her wellness vision was, I have such energy, I spin on my heels.
Wow.
And that says a lot, right?
Yeah. Quality of life.
Right. That's exactly what it is. So we start with that big picture of what is your personal vision of wellness. And then we step back to create short-term goals, medium-term goals, and so forth. And those goals should be stepping stones to get you to your vision.
Yeah, very empowering. Dr. James Hill, he's been on the podcast a couple of times,
Sure.
and he talks about ask why until you cry to kind of get past the number on the scale or fitting into a dress for a wedding or losing weight for a spouse or whatever, to really get to that underlying motivation. So I like taking it to the next step. And like you said, painting this picture, having this vision of what it feels and tastes and looks like to achieve that sense of empowered well-being. I love that. Well, you mentioned habits, and in the book you talk about habits and habit loops, which I thought was really interesting because I think a lot of times we don't get to the habit loop part of the process, and we're just trying to force ourselves to change a habit, maybe break a bad habit, possibly starting a new habit. But then things kind of break down if we don't understand the habit loop. So can you explain that for us?
Sure. Well, first of all, I did not coin this. It comes from a really good book by Charles Duhigg, I think is his last name. The whole book is all about habits. And the point is, this works for forming a new habit or breaking a habit, but there's usually something that triggers you or cues you into the habit. So as an example, if I were trying to get into the habit of packing lunch every day for work, I might link it to something I already do every day, and that's take my dirty dinner dishes to the dishwasher. So it might be the cue is dinner's over, so I put my dishes away, and now I'm going to pack my lunch for tomorrow. So the cue being walking to the dishwasher, the new habit being packing my lunch, and then the third part of the cue is the reward. So the reward is the next day, I'm eating a healthy lunch. And if you can just kind of force yourself to do it a certain number of times, it really does become a habit.
Yeah, so connecting those dots, that's very helpful. I love that. You also talk about the hurdle method, which I hadn't heard before, and I'm like, oh, I think this could help me. So tell us about the hurdle method, and it's an acronym, and you can explain it.
Yes, sure. This is just something I've noticed in my practice. People often have a very hard time anticipating something that's out of the norm, or they're overwhelmed by the idea of something that's out of the norm, so they don't look for a solution. So it might be like your kid's home because of snow days. So because of that, you don't have your usual routine and you just let it all go to pot. So the hurdle method is an acronym, and I'll go over that in a second, but it's to help you anticipate obstacles and to create solutions. So hurdle, Hurdle, hurdle is for how, H is for how. So you ask, how is my upcoming schedule different? And it might be, I have a 6:00 meeting, which would interfere with dinner, or my kids are home today, which will interfere with whatever. And U is understand how these events or appointments or obligations are going to derail you from your healthy eating plan or your healthy lifestyle. And then R is record. So you will record your options. You got to brainstorm all the different possible solutions. So if I have a 6:00 meeting, it's going to interfere with my dinner. I might think I'm going to call my husband, ask him if he can get home and start dinner. I might think, okay, I know these 2 places I can pick up, or I'm going to ask somebody else to pick up my kids so I can come home right after the meeting. So things like that. You record all your options. And then D is decide on your solution. So you want to pick something that's realistic, not pick something that's perfect, but undoable. Mm-hmm. Pick something that is realistic. And the next one, L, is where people really get tripped up. So I really emphasize how important the L is, and that is list the steps. Mm. So if you are going to pack a picnic, it's not enough to say, I'm going to pack a picnic. You have to think, well, what am I going to pack it in? Do I have a freeze pack? Do I have the foods? What am I going to make? When am I going to get to the grocery store to buy the things I'm going to make? It's all those steps that have to be listed. And then E is for exercise your choice and evaluate it. So you want to go ahead and try out the solution that you picked under D for decide, and then see how that works out for you and evaluate it, because you want to think, well, what am I going to do next time? Did this work out perfectly? Do I have something I might do differently? And that's how we learn from it. But the main thing is to scan your day. Now, the first one is H for how. How is my upcoming schedule going to potentially get in my way?
Well, I think that's so important because I'm just like the average Joe when it comes to, hey, if I've got my routine, I'm good. Mm-hmm. I've linked some things together. I've gotten better over time. I'm pretty good. But as soon as I'm out of my routine, it's sort of like everything's, it's up for grabs. And I think we tend to tell ourselves, and I always say this, maybe it's me, like the snow day thing or travel. Well, that was just one day or a couple of days. I'll just get back on track when I get back to my routine. But when you take a step back and look, those non-routine times can really add up.
They can.
Yeah, I think this process is very clear and it really addresses a lot of the places where things just can kind of break down, because I think we can just get stuck saying, this came up, okay, I'll just muscle through this and it'll be fine. Or if it's not fine, well, I'll just get back on track tomorrow. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can really break it apart and, right, like you said, list those little steps out. And that evaluation piece is really key. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, well, I tried that, it didn't work. What didn't work? What are you going to try next time that might work better? And that might not work. You might take a few times till you figure it out.
That's right. I always tell the people I'm working with that I want them to do the best they can do today with the resources you have today. So sometimes that's not even a B+. It's the best you can do today with the resources you have today. But there's also a risk in that. And that is what you said, just kind of letting it slide because I don't travel that often. Oh, the kids are home for a snow day. It's not that often. It can be a very good thing because it takes you away from the whole idea of perfection, which is silly, but it can also be a negative thing because it can give you excuses to not do very well.
Yes, and I'll share a personal experience. I've talked to you before about my husband's high cholesterol, and you've given me some great advice, but I did bring him in to see a dietitian. He agreed. I didn't drag him in or anything. But I thought, well, it's not my area of expertise. Let's go see what the dietitian has to say. And there were a couple things that were some pretty big aha moments for me, but one that relates to this story. She said, well, what do you typically eat for breakfast? Do you ever have donuts? He's like, oh my gosh, we have donuts once in a blue moon. At lunch, do you ever have a cheeseburger? Oh, I have fast food once in a blue moon. But then when we started looking at all of those little once in a blue moon things, then it was like, oh,
right.
It really does add up. And those little things, can make a big difference. So just continue to learn and improve.
Right.
Now, this book is, like you said, it's about a lifestyle. It's about habits and behaviors. It's not a diet.
Correct.
But you do have some nutrition information in there. You've got some recipes. We know that people who are prone to diabetes, prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, there's a lot of cardiovascular things going on. So in general, the type of diet that people who are at risk for diabetes should follow is really the diet everybody should follow, which is a heart-healthy diet.
Correct.
So having said that, do you want to tell us a little bit about the nutrition parts of this book and the recipes?
Sure. So the recipes are there. There's maybe like 18 or 20 recipes, and they're there as lessons. So one lesson might be, how can I use lentils instead of ground beef? So there's a lentil chili recipe. And then another one is, how can I add more vegetables to the foods that I already love? So I have a spaghetti meat sauce that has extra vegetables and a potato salad that has extra vegetables. So that's the purpose of the recipes. It's not a strict diet plan, because I hate that. For a number of reasons, I hate that. But the diet recommendations in general, like you said, are the things that we would recommend to anybody. So it's a variety of wholesome foods. Nothing is left out. I do encourage more plants than animals, but it's not vegan. It's not vegetarian. I encourage some fish. I kind of guide along the ideas of a Mediterranean style diet, but there are other options that I have examples for in the book. I do have vegetarian and vegan examples. I have an example for the DASH diet, which is dietary approaches to stop hypertension, a diet that was created by the scientists at NIH. But I would say that most of the dietary guidance follows along the lines of a Mediterranean style diet.
Right. And as you mentioned earlier, trying to get more nutrient dense foods into the diet, and maybe decreasing what I just refer to as more like empty calorie or less nutrient dense foods, trying to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to the nutrients.
Yes.
So lifestyle, habits, nutrition, diet, if you will. But you also talk about exercise.
Yes.
And you address a really interesting aspect that, we think we're being active, but we may not realize how much sitting we're doing. And so you have this chapter about the active couch potato, and I'd really like you to explain that.
Sure. A lot of people confuse busyness with physical activity. So I used to ask people, are you active? Are you physically active? I never ask that question anymore, because the time that I asked somebody to tell me about that activity after she told me she was very active, she told me about how she had to drive her kids all around. So it is very easy to confuse busy, and particularly exhausted busy, with being physically active. So the idea behind active couch potato is that we want to be active throughout our day. So some people are active 30 minutes a day or 60 minutes a day because they might go to the gym or go running or do both. And so that's their activity for the day. But what are they doing those other 23 hours? So somebody who sits for most of the rest of that time after working out every day, I would call that person an active couch potato. And we just know that that's unhealthy in a number of ways. Too much sitting is linked to a number of diseases, including obesity, cardiovascular disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers too. So we want to have some activity all through the day.
I think that's really important, because kind of newer research that looked at these active people, like maybe they run 30 minutes a day, but then when they looked at the whole 24-hour period, like you said, it was really an eye-opener, like, there's a lot of other things we could be doing. I recently got a standing desk, and it's actually one that can move. So I can stand sometimes, sit sometimes, because standing all day is not necessarily healthy for you either. But yeah, making sure that you're not just, really being sedentary when you don't realize that you are.
Right.
One of the conferences you and I were at, I think it was in Portugal, I had just gotten my Apple Watch. And so I was looking at, oh my gosh, we're sitting in this conference all day. But then, we'd get out and we'd walk. And I'm like, I'm so much more active when I'm at home. Well, then the next couple of weeks, I realized I was actually sitting more at home
Wow,
than I was
that's
at
funny.
a conference where you sit all day. It blew my mind. Hence came the standing desk. So,
you know what? I have a treadmill desk, and I actually wrote this book, Prediabetes, A Complete Guide, while walking 1.5 miles an hour.
wow, that is impressive. I'm afraid I would hurt myself.
No, it's very easy.
I'm really clumsy. I have fallen off the treadmill before when I was just actually trying to look at my phone or something. So, but hey, you go. Monica Reinagel, the nutrition diva, she also has a treadmill desk. And I did a call with her before we did our podcast interview. And she was walking on the treadmill the whole time we were Skyping. And I was getting a little dizzy just watching her.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, it's not so much for me, but I have a lot of other fun activities that I do. So I think I'm all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the lifestyle, the habits, the diet, the recipes, and the active couch potato that we talked about. You also, I want to circle back, this may be more along the lines of the habits, but this also really caught my eye because I think about this a lot with myself with like Autopilot. So you have a section in the book called Meet Your Autopilot. So tell us about that.
You're right. It does have to do with habits. Well, this particular section has to do with the autopilot that controls your mind. So our thoughts are also habits. But our autopilot, of course, fits into all aspects of this because we want to be in the habit of going for a walk after dinner or the habit of packing our lunch. And when we do it enough, it is autopilot. And that frees our mind up to concentrate on things that are harder or, take more mental energy. But in this particular part, Meet Your Autopilot, I am talking about the thoughts that are your habits. And this is just something I have seen a lot with people I work with, men and women, that they have a very negative way of speaking to themselves that they would never, ever use with anybody else. So, somebody will say to me, I went to this party and I did this and I did that. And then I ate 6 French fries. And I was so mad at myself that I ate those French fries. I told myself that I was a pig and I wouldn't eat anything else, but I couldn't help it. And so then I dug into this and I dug into that. And now I'm doomed. And you can see that I have no self-control and just going on and on and on. Because these are habits that we've just told ourselves that if we do something wrong, then we're a loser. Or if we eat too much, then we're doomed to be overweight. But the thing of it is that these are not facts. Mm-hmm. They're just bad thoughts.
Yeah, self-defeating.
Yes. Shame, whether we put shame on somebody or we put shame on ourselves, I have never seen shame improve someone's life.
Right.
Ever.
It does not empower you you have to have a positive approach.
Right.
You can't when you're in shame.
Right. So what I want people to do is to learn to stop, first of all, recognize that negative self-talk and then stop it. And it can be hard, particularly at first, and you might find yourself stopping it, 20 minutes down the road when ideally you would stop it 1 minute in, mm-hmm. but you stop it where you can and you catch yourself and you go, wait a minute, I don't always have bad self-control. I can even think of a time yesterday when I didn't eat those 3 cookies that were sitting in front of me or whatever it is. And so if you're used to saying, oh, I have no self-control or I'm so lazy, then I think you can immediately find examples to disprove that. And that's exactly what I want you to do.
Think through that and be more aware of when those times are happening and kind of reframe those thoughts.
Reframing is exactly the right term for that.
Very powerful. Yeah, have some self-compassion,
Yes.
that you would give to others.
Mm-hmm.
So you've shared some examples and stories from your patients. Are you seeing anything different currently with your patient population? Anything bubbling up, whether it's fad diets or questions about the food system or food labels, anything that is of interest that you want to share?
The thing that I see a lot of actually disturbs me quite a bit, and it's a trend I've been seeing for years, but it seems to be getting worse. And that's the idea that our food supply is trying to kill us, mm-hmm. And that everything, we look at it as a negative. So when I ask people to tell me about their diet, I really want to hear about what they eat. But often what they want to tell me is all the things they refuse to eat because they think it's poison. So I think people have a lot of unfounded fears, whether it be pesticides or a preservative or a type of packaging or whatever. I think people have just a lot of fears. And so they often will gravitate toward maybe an unhealthful food that I would not call nutrient dense or health boosting, just because it doesn't have whatever they're afraid of, whether that's gluten or it says that it's organic or whatever. So, you can buy organic junk food for sure. And I see people doing that because they are fearful of something. So I just want people to focus on really healthy foods to eat and eat nutrient-dense, health-boosting, disease-fighting foods most of the time.
Amen. Very good. This is not only a great resource and book for the general public, but I think it's a great resource for health professionals as well. I think it can provide a lot of insight to helping patients and clients with diabetes or prediabetes or at risk. Now, you also have sections in the book where you have sort of like a little sidebar, and one of them caught my eye, and I wanted to bring it up. It says, "Do metabolism boosters work?" Because you're talking about the metabolism in a section of your book. And you go on to talk about ice cold water. And actually, let me read it. So yeah, you're talking about the metabolic rate, and the sidebar is, "Do metabolism boosters work?" And you have, when you drink very cold water, the body uses about an extra 12 calories to warm it up. That's hardly enough to force yourself to drink icy water. And you have other examples in there, but that's the part about the cold water. And I just wanted to bring that up because if anybody listening has recently heard that drinking ice cold water is a great way to boost your metabolism, I want to shout from the rooftops that this is one of those things that while it may be scientifically true, the 12 calories are not meaningful. So can we please just focus on the things that really are meaningful, that really do matter, and get away from some of this hype and misinformation?
Hear, hear. Spot on. It's very distracting. People worry about making their water ice cold and how much they're drinking, but I would really rather put their energies into finding recipes the whole family likes, figuring out how to get to the grocery store on a regular basis, that type of thing. Like you said, things that actually matter.
Standing up a little bit more instead of sitting.
Yes, correct.
And that makes me think of the whole cinnamon thing with diabetes, and maybe you could address that. I kind of put you on the spot, but I'm sure you can address that, we hear that adding cinnamon to your diet can help manage diabetes.
Well, there's some research that suggests that it's helpful, and there's research that suggests that it doesn't. I think when we look at the preponderance of the evidence, it's not super strong to say putting cinnamon on everything is going to help you. But that being said, we do know that herbs and spices have the same types of phytonutrients that fruits and vegetables have. So I want people to use a lot. They taste good. They do have some nutrients in them. They have some health boosters in them. So use them. Just don't expect to normalize your blood sugar that way. And what I don't like, though, is people taking the supplements. Even the cinnamon supplements can have a toxicity on the liver. So even though cinnamon is a natural thing, you know what? So's tobacco, so's lightning. Natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you.
Right.
Particularly in whatever dose you might take it. So I'm not a fan of the supplements, but I am a really big fan of sprinkling some cinnamon and using some vinegar and using all the other herbs and spices to make our food taste great. And the bonus is there's going to be some health benefits somewhere down the line because they just have these great compounds in them.
Thank you for clearing that up. You also recently did some videos where you were talking about resistant starch.
Yes.
Whenever I come across anything resistant starch related, I come to you and I ask you about it. So I know you've written about this. You're very, very knowledgeable. So if people haven't heard the term before, or they've heard it and they just don't get what is the deal with resistant starch, can you explain that? And I will link to your videos in the show notes at soundbitesrd.com too.
Terrific. So the long and the short of it is resistant starch is exactly what it sounds like. It's starch that is resistant to our digestive enzymes. Since it doesn't get digested, it doesn't get absorbed, So there's fewer calories. It's not an enormous amount, but it will be fewer calories, and it will be less starch turning to blood glucose. So there's definite benefits for people with diabetes and prediabetes, and really benefits to everybody. Resistant starch is a type of fiber. So it travels to the colon where other fibers go, and resistant starch is fermentable. So that just means that the gut bacteria ferment it. They basically are lunching on it, and they get their energy that way. There are compounds that are produced that have health benefits for us. So some of those health benefits might be the health of the colon cells, and it might be improved insulin resistance and better blood glucose control. It might also relate to cholesterol metabolism. So there's a host of things that could possibly be going on. To sum it up, resistant starch is a type of fiber, and we will get it in some foods that are just naturally will have resistant starch. So something like oats. Oats have a lot of resistant starch when they're raw, but as soon as we cook them, the cells swell, more ability for the digestive enzymes to get to it. So cooked oats don't have so much, but raw oats in the way of muesli, they do. Things like lentils and beans have it. Cold potatoes, cold starchy foods like cold pasta, cold rice. So once you cook it and then you cool it, the way the cells form, it's a little bit like a gelatinizing. The way they form, it makes it resistant. So you'll have a little bit resistant starch in your potato salad where you wouldn't if you ate those potatoes right after boiling them.
Very interesting.
It is.
Good for that microbiome too.
Well, that's exactly right, because it's the gut bacteria that, like I said, they're lunching on it.
Well, I just think this is a wonderful book, and, you're so smart and you're so savvy with the way that you communicate, reading your blog, and I share out your information quite a bit because it's just always enlightening and meaningful, and I always look for that.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about the book or about your work?
I would just say that the book will give you a very grounded, basic guideline to step-by-step making your lifestyle better. And that's why the subtitle is Lifestyle Reset, to stop prediabetes and other chronic illnesses.
Wonderful. Well, I think we can all benefit from that. Like I said, it's not just a great resource and book for the general public, but health professionals as well. So congratulations on the book, Jill. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
It's so great to talk with you.
You too.
And hopefully see you at another meeting sometime soon, somewhere fabulous maybe, who knows?
Yes, for sure.
Thank you again. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind and maybe with a lifestyle restart in mind. Till next time. Thanks again for tuning in to today's show. As promised, here are a few announcements from my partner, the American Association of Diabetes Educators. As the incidence rate of youth with type 1 and type 2 diabetes continues to climb, it's critical that the diabetes care team understand the best methods for self-management and support through each life stage. So AADE has released new pediatric guidance for diabetes care, as well as additional resources for parents and caregivers of children and adolescents with diabetes. You can learn more at diabeteseducator.org/pediatric. That's for the healthcare professionals, and also diabeteseducator.org/children with diabetes. That's for people and families with diabetes. Also, population health models of care offer many opportunities and benefits for diabetes educators, systems, payers, and providers. Find out how population health can support the role of the diabetes care team in a new Perspectives on Practice paper from AADE. You can access this and other resources at diabeteseducator.org/population health. Thanks again for tuning in.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke.